So what is governance? It involves serving the society. It involves serving the society by safeguarding territorial integrity of the country. By safeguarding territorial integrity of the country. The country की territorial integrity, sovereignty को safeguard करना भी governance है. And ensuring individual liberty and security. For example, there was a mass molestation of women on the New Year's Eve in Bangalore. So, it is a duty of the government to ensure liberty and security of its people. It also involves upholding the rule of the law. For example, government machinery need to ensure that everybody is treated equally before the rule of the law. So it's government machinery role to ensure that everybody is treated equally before the rule of the law. So governance involves in upholding the rule of the law. So it is the role of the governance to ensure the effective delivery of the service, transparency and accountability with which government is providing service to its people. And assessing this, we analyze and classify a governance as good governance or bad governance. So what is governance? So it involves serving the society by safeguarding the territorial integrity of the country, ensuring liberty and security of its people. Involves upholding the rule of the law so that everyone is treated equally before the rule of the law, and delivery of services, transparency, accountability with which government provides service to its people. So now governance involves the process by which governments are chosen, monitored and replaced. So governance involves the process by which governments are chosen, monitored and replaced, and it involves a system of interaction, that how administration interacts with citizen, and how administration interact with the legislature, and how that is judiciary and executive and legislature interact with each other. So it talks about the process by which the government is chosen and the system of interaction between various organs of the government, and ability of the government to create and implement a public policy. For example, make the public policy, create public policy to eradicate malnutrition and implement it effectively to reach the end goal. Then mechanism by which citizens or a group define their interests and interact with the system. For example, Anna Hazare movement, civil society. It was a civil society movement that aimed to reduce corruption in the government. So it is a mechanism by which governance involves a mechanism by which citizen and the group define their interests and interact with the system. So what is governance? It involves basically running the affairs of the government. So it involves basically running the affairs of the government. So the behavioral part of the government is known as governance. UNDP के according, what is governance? It is the exercise of the political, economic and administrative authority to manage a nation's affairs. So it is the exercise of political, economic and administrative authority to manage a nation's affairs. So this is governance. It is the exercise of political, economic and administrative authority to manage a nation affairs. को किस तरीके से government अपनी political, economic and administrative authority को क्या करती है, एक्सरसाइज करती है नेशन के अफेयर को मैनेज करने के लिए, उसे बोलते हैं गवर्नेंस अकॉर्डिंग टू यूनाइटेड नेशन डेवलपमेंट प्रोग्राम. गवर्नेंस इज द एक्सरसाइज ऑफ पॉलिटिकल, इकोनॉमिक एंड एडमिनिस्ट्रेटिव अथॉरिटी टू मैनेज इट्स नेशंस अफेयर. एशियन डेवलपमेंट के अकॉर्डिंग गवर्नेंस इज अ मैनर इन विच द पावर इज एक्सरसाइज्ड इन द मैनेजमेंट ऑफ द कंट्री सोशियो इकोनॉमिक रिसोर्सेज फॉर डेवलपमेंट. कि जो गवर्नमेंट किस तरीके से पावर जो भी गवर्नमेंट की यूटिलाइज कर रही है इन द मैनेजमेंट ऑफ द कंट्री सोशल इकोनॉमिक रिसोर्सेज, किसके लिए, डेवलपमेंट के लिए. So ADB की definition है, governance is a manner in which the power is exercised in the management of the country's socio-economic resources for the development. So if government is effectively utilizing the resources, we call it as good governance. Governance is a manner in which government act to effectively utilize available resources for the betterment or the development of the country. So if we talk about Singapore, it's a very small country and it's have very limited resources, but it utilize its limited resources effectively, and therefore Singapore is developed. So good governance will lead to the development of the country, like for example Singapore. So we talk about India. India is a huge country with huge resources, huge human resources, is not able to utilize its resources effectively. Governance mechanism in India is poor. We can say governance mechanism in India is poor. That's why India is not that developed. Factors are why governance mechanism is poor: because of corruption, nepotism, favoritism and other social issues. Governance mechanism in India is poor. We must know that country with the good governance will win the race of development, as we have seen this example of Singapore. And we can also simply say that governance is a way those in power use their power. We are a functioning democracy, but we are not governed well. That's why India faces a lot of challenges. So what are the evidences that India is not still, we don't have good governance? India is not governed well. What are the evidences? First one is political power in India is eroding. Political power in India is eroding. For example, riots are taking place every now and then. In Naxal affected areas, state is absent in many places. These are called as liberated zones. There is a failure of the government. This is a classic example of the failure of the government governance. For example, civil services is not ready to change, that suffer from rat tapeism. Civil services in India is a relic of colonial era. It's a relic of colonial era. Therefore, civil services reforms are required. So this is also, red tapeism is also an example of bad governance. Then we see the example of Patidars in Gujarat, Marathas in Maharashtra, Jat in Haryana. These are economically, educationally empowered community. These are demanding reservation. And we must see how state is reacting to all this. In some state has gone down on its knees and accepting these demands. State has gone down on knees to accept these demands. In many states it has to happen. We see Naxal and Maoist, they want to liberate themselves. Governance machinery in the country has failed them. So governance machinery in the country has failed them. So this is a classic case of bad governance. Armed forces which are supposed to be employed to deal with the external threats is employed against our own citizens in insurgent areas. If we talk about the tribals, they are displaced but they are seldom heard. All these are the challenges before the government and the question mark over the government's ability to govern, hence the question marks on the governance. So all these are the challenges before the government and the question mark over the government's ability to govern, and hence the question mark on the governance in India. We see example of bad governance. For example, demonetization happened in November 2016. It was introduced with the noble objective to curb black money, to stop terror financing, to move India towards cashless economy. So it was started with very noble objective to curb black money, to stop terror financing, and to move India towards a cashless economy. However, when we look at its implementation of the demonetization, that is a failure of the government. But implementation of demonetization is the example of failure of governance. For example, people were queuing up in the lines outside the bank and ATMs. So people were queuing up the line outside the bank and ATMs. Many lost their livelihood because instead of focusing on earning the money, they were queuing up in the lines to either to deposit money or to withdraw money from the banks. So people today, therefore the people today are crying for the good governance. Former United Nations Secretary General said, good governance is perhaps the single most important factor in eradicating poverty and promoting development. So former United Nations Secretary General said, good governance is perhaps the single most important factor in eradicating poverty and promoting development. तो हमें चाहिए good governance, इससे ही सारे काम हो जाएंगे. It is the single most important factor in eradicating poverty and promoting development. As we see present situation, the difference between rich and poor is widening. We need to move to the society where the delivery of the service is not marred by corruption, nepotism, and the solution is we ought to be governed well. We need good governance. All this process involved in governing a state is called governance. So all the process that is involved in the governing the state is known as governance. How the governance change and modified so that overall development of the society takes place. We need to ask the question how the governance should be changed and modified so that overall development of the society takes place. In India, at the broadest level, many major issues still remain unsettled. In India, at the broadest level, many major social issues still remain unsettled. For example, role of government. What is the role of government vis-a-vis people is left unanswered. What is the role of the government vis-a-vis people is left unanswered. Radicalism is taking roots in our society. People are radicalized from north to south. How we are going to solve it? It is the issue of governance. So how we are going to solve the problem of radicalization is the issue of governance. Delhi is regarded as the most polluted city. How we are going to solve the problem of climate change pollution? It is also the issue of the governance. So there is a denial or absence of the basic services. People don't have clean air, drinking water. How we are going to provide them the basic services is a question of governance.